Today, we are going to study one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the world, Plato. His ideas laid the foundation for Western philosophy, politics, education, ethics, and literary criticism. Even after more than 2,400 years, his thoughts continue to influence the way people think about truth, justice, art, and society. Before we begin the detailed topics, let us first understand why Plato is so important. Imagine that you are standing in front of a beautiful painting of a flower. The painting looks exactly like a real flower, but can you smell its fragrance? Can it grow? Can it produce seeds? No, it is only an image of the real flower. Now think about a photograph of that painting. That photograph is not even the real painting. It is simply a copy of a copy. Plato used a similar idea to explain reality. According to him, the real world that we see with our eyes is already an imperfect copy of a higher, perfect world called the world of forms or ideas. If an artist paints an object from this world, the artwork becomes a copy of an imperfect copy. Because of this belief, Plato questioned whether poetry and art could really teach the truth. This simple idea became the starting point of literary criticism. Before Plato, poets like Homer were treated almost like teachers of society. People believed that poetry taught wisdom, morality, and history. Plato was one of the first philosophers to ask a bold question: should we believe everything that poets say? This question completely changed the study of literature. Plato did not criticize poetry because he hated beauty or imagination. Instead, he believed that literature has great power over human emotions. Since literature influences people's minds and character, he argued that it must also have moral responsibility. In other words, literature should not simply entertain people, it should help people become wiser and more virtuous. For this reason, Plato is known as the first great literary critic in Western literature. He examined literature not only for its beauty but also for its impact on individuals and society. Throughout this presentation, we will understand Plato's life, his philosophy, his theory of forms, his concept of imitation or mimesis, his criticism of poetry, his ideas about education and the ideal state, and finally how his student Aristotle responded to many of his arguments. By the end of this lesson, you will not only understand what Plato believed but also why his ideas remain one of the most important foundations of literary criticism and philosophy today. So, let us begin our journey into the fascinating world of Plato's criticism. Now that we have a basic introduction to Plato, let us understand one very important question. Why did Plato think the way he did? Many students memorize Plato's theories without understanding their background. But if we know what happened during his lifetime, every one of his ideas begins to make sense. Think of this simple example. Suppose a child grows up in a peaceful home where everyone is honest and kind. That child will naturally trust people. Now imagine another child who grows up in a home filled with fights, betrayal, and violence. That child may become very careful and may not trust people easily. The same principle applies to Plato. His philosophy was not created in a peaceful world. It was shaped by political chaos, war, injustice, and personal tragedy. This slide shows the three major historical events that completely transformed Plato's thinking. Let us understand them one by one. Event 1. The Peloponnesian War, 431–404 BCE. The first event was the Peloponnesian War, a long war fought between Athens and Sparta. The war lasted for 27 years, making it one of the longest and most destructive wars in ancient Greece. Before this war, Athens was known as the greatest city in Greece. It was famous for democracy, education, philosophy, literature, architecture, and trade. It was often called the Golden Age of Athens. People believed Athens was powerful and unbeatable. But after 27 years of continuous fighting, everything changed. Athens suffered a humiliating defeat. Thousands of people died. The economy collapsed. Political stability disappeared. Families were broken. People lost faith in their leaders. Imagine a beautiful building standing firmly for many years. Then a powerful earthquake destroys it within a few moments. That is exactly what happened to Athens. Young Plato watched his beloved city fall apart before his eyes. This experience made him ask an important question. If political systems can fail so badly, where can we find something permanent and trustworthy? This question later led him to search for eternal truth instead of temporary human opinions. Event 2. The 30 Tyrants, 404–403 BCE. After Athens lost the war, democracy was removed. A group called the 30 Tyrants came to power. They established an oligarchy, meaning only a small group of powerful men controlled the government. What makes this event even more personal is that some members of this government were actually related to Plato. Initially, Plato hoped that educated aristocrats would govern wisely, but very soon he became deeply disappointed. The 30 Tyrants became cruel rulers. They executed innocent people. They seized people's property. They ruled through fear and violence. Instead of justice, there was oppression. Instead of wisdom, there was corruption. Imagine appointing a class monitor because you believe they are responsible. Instead of helping classmates, the monitor bullies everyone. You would lose trust not only in that person but also in the entire system. That is exactly how Plato felt. He realized that simply giving power to wealthy or noble people does not guarantee good government. Good rulers must possess wisdom and moral character. This idea later became the foundation of his famous concept of the philosopher king, a ruler guided by knowledge and virtue rather than wealth or ambition. Event 3. The execution of Socrates, 399 BCE. The third event was the most painful of all. It changed Plato's life forever. Plato's beloved teacher was Socrates. Socrates did not write books. He taught people by asking thoughtful questions. His goal was to help people discover truth through reasoning. Many young Athenians admired him. However, some political leaders disliked him because he encouraged people to question false beliefs and unjust authority. Eventually, Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods of Athens. He was brought to trial. The court found him guilty. Instead of escaping from prison, Socrates chose to obey the law. He calmly drank a cup of poison called hemlock and died. Imagine watching the wisest, most honest teacher you know being sentenced to death simply because he spoke the truth. How would you feel? Plato was devastated. He concluded that democracy could sometimes make terrible decisions when people were driven by ignorance rather than wisdom. From that day onward, Plato became convinced that society should not be governed by popular opinion alone. Instead, it should be guided by people who truly understand justice, truth, and goodness. Diagnostic insight. Now look at the statement at the bottom of the slide. It says that Plato's philosophy was an attempt to create an unshakable foundation against the uncertainties of history. This is the key idea you must remember. The Peloponnesian War taught Plato that political power is unstable. The 30 Tyrants taught him that rulers without virtue become dangerous. The execution of Socrates taught him that even democracy can make unjust decisions. These three painful experiences convinced Plato that human opinions change, governments rise and fall, and societies become corrupt. Therefore, he searched for something eternal, perfect, and unchanging. This search eventually led him to develop the theory of forms, the belief that beyond this changing world exists a higher world of perfect and eternal realities. Understanding these historical events is essential because every major idea in Plato's philosophy, including his criticism of poetry, his political philosophy, and his educational theory, grew out of these experiences. If you remember these three events, you will understand not only what Plato believed, but also why he believed it. Now that we have understood the historical events that shaped Plato's thinking, the next question is, how did Plato try to solve the problems of society? Plato did not simply criticize the world around him. He believed that if society was to improve, people had to be educated properly. Instead of complaining about bad governments, he decided to create an institution that would train wise leaders and preserve the search for truth. This brings us to two of Plato's greatest contributions, the Academy and the dialogue method. Let us study them one by one. Part 1. The Academy. After the death of Socrates, Plato traveled to many places, learning from different cultures and thinkers. When he returned to Athens, around 387 BCE, he founded a school called the Academy. This was not an ordinary school. It is widely regarded as the first organized institution of higher learning in the Western world. Many people even consider it the earliest university in European history. Imagine the universities we know today, where students study philosophy, mathematics, science, politics, ethics, and literature under experienced teachers. The Academy worked in a similar way, although it existed more than 2,300 years ago. It continued to function for nearly 900 years, until it was closed by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I in 529 CE. This long life shows how influential Plato's institution became. But what was its purpose? The Academy was not created merely to give people knowledge. Its main goal was to produce wise, moral, and responsible leaders. Plato believed that education should not simply prepare people for a job. It should prepare them to govern society wisely. He wanted students to develop three qualities. First, the ability to think logically. Second, the courage to seek truth. Third, the moral character to use knowledge for the good of society. For this reason, students studied subjects such as mathematics, geometry, astronomy, ethics, politics, philosophy, and logic. You may wonder why mathematics was so important. Plato believed that mathematics trains the mind to think clearly and precisely. For example, the answer to 2 plus 2 is always 4, no matter where you are in the world. Similarly, Plato believed that truth should also be universal and unchanging. So, mathematical thinking prepared the mind to understand higher philosophical truths. Think of the Academy as a training center for future philosopher kings. Just as a medical college trains doctors before they treat patients, Plato's Academy trained future rulers before they governed people. Plato believed that without proper education, political leaders would repeat the same mistakes that had destroyed Athens during his lifetime. That is why the slide says the Academy's core mission was to prevent the political catastrophes and popular mistakes that Plato had witnessed. Part 2. The Dialogue. Now let us move to the second half of the slide. One interesting fact about Plato is that he almost never wrote books in the modern sense. He did not write long essays explaining his opinions directly. Instead, he wrote more than 30 philosophical dialogues. A dialogue is simply a conversation between two or more people. Most of these conversations feature Socrates as the main speaker. You may ask, if Plato is the author, why does Socrates speak instead of Plato? The answer is simple. Plato wanted readers to think for themselves instead of blindly accepting his ideas. He believed that truth is discovered through questioning and discussion, not through memorizing information. Imagine a teacher entering the classroom and simply writing all the answers on the board. Students may copy them, but they may not truly understand. Now imagine another teacher asking thoughtful questions one after another until students discover the answer on their own. Which lesson would you remember longer? Obviously, the second one. That is exactly how Socrates taught, and Plato preserved this teaching method through his dialogues. In these conversations, Socrates asks simple questions. Each answer leads to another question. Slowly, people realize that many of their beliefs are based on assumptions rather than knowledge. This method helps people move from opinion to understanding. The slide uses the Greek word doxa. Doxa means opinion, belief, or common assumption. For example, many people may believe something simply because everyone else believes it. But Plato says that popular opinion is not necessarily truth. Truth must be examined carefully through reasoning. This method is called the Socratic method or dialectical method. Plato and the Sophists. Another important point mentioned on this slide is Plato's rejection of the Sophists. Who were the Sophists? The Sophists were professional teachers who charged money to teach public speaking and argument. Their goal was often to help people win debates, even if their arguments were not true. For them, success meant convincing the audience. For Plato, success meant discovering the truth. Imagine two lawyers arguing in court. One lawyer knows the truth but speaks poorly. The other lawyer knows the facts are false but speaks so beautifully that everyone believes him. The Sophists admired the second lawyer because he won the argument. Plato admired the first lawyer because he defended the truth. This is the biggest difference between Plato and the Sophists. According to Plato, beautiful speech without truth is dangerous. True education should teach people not merely how to speak, but how to think. This slide teaches us that Plato responded to the failures of his society in two practical ways. First, he founded the academy, where future leaders could receive a deep education in philosophy, science, mathematics, ethics, and politics. Second, he wrote dialogues, using Socrates' method of questioning to help people discover truth through logical reasoning instead of blind belief. Together, the academy and the dialogues became Plato's blueprint for building a wiser society. He believed that when education develops both the intellect and moral character, it produces individuals capable of creating a just and stable state. These ideas became the foundation for much of Western education and philosophy and continue to influence teaching methods even today. Before we begin studying Plato's ideas in detail, we need to become familiar with the important characters who appear in his dialogues, especially the Republic. Think of this as watching a movie. Before understanding the story, it helps to know who the main characters are, what kind of personalities they have, and why they are important. Similarly, Plato presents his philosophy through conversations between different people. Each character represents a different way of thinking. Today, we will learn about four important characters: Socrates, Glaucon, Adeimantus, and Thrasymachus. Each one plays a unique role in helping us understand Plato's philosophy. 1. Socrates, the midwife of ideas. Let us begin with the most important character, Socrates. Although Plato wrote the dialogues, it is usually Socrates who speaks throughout the conversation. Why? Because Socrates was Plato's beloved teacher, and Plato believed that no one was better at searching for truth. The slide calls Socrates the midwife. At first, this sounds strange. What does a midwife do? A midwife does not create a baby. She helps bring the baby safely into the world. Similarly, Socrates believed that he did not put knowledge into people's minds. Instead, he helped people discover the knowledge that was already hidden within them. He acted as a guide, not as someone who simply gave answers. This teaching method is called the Socratic method. Instead of giving lectures, Socrates asked questions. One question led to another. Slowly, people began to recognize mistakes in their own thinking. For example, suppose someone confidently says, "Justice means helping your friends and hurting your enemies." Instead of saying, "You are wrong," Socrates would ask, "What if your friend becomes a criminal? Should you still help him? What if your enemy is actually a good person?" Through these questions, the person realizes that the original definition is incomplete. Notice something important. Socrates does not insult people. He helps them think more deeply. Another method used by Socrates is called Socratic irony. This means he often pretended not to know the answer. He would say, "I know nothing. Please teach me." The other person would confidently explain their ideas. Then, Through careful questioning, Socrates would reveal the contradictions in their thinking. This approach made learning active rather than passive. His ultimate goal was always the same: to discover absolute truth through careful reasoning. 2. Glaucon, the spirited seeker. Now let us move to Glaucon. Glaucon was actually Plato's elder brother. In the Republic, he is one of Socrates' closest conversation partners. Unlike Thrasymachus, Glaucon is not trying to defeat Socrates. Instead, he wants to understand the truth completely. However, he also challenges Socrates with very difficult questions. One of Glaucon's most famous contributions is the story of the Ring of Gyges. Imagine you find a magical ring. Whenever you wear it, you become completely invisible. No one can see you. You cannot be caught. You cannot be punished. Now ask yourself honestly, would every person continue to behave morally? Or would many people steal, cheat, or misuse their power because no one could catch them? Glaucon argues that many people behave justly only because they fear punishment. If punishment disappeared, they might stop being moral. This is a very important challenge. Glaucon is asking, do people love justice because it is good, or only because they fear the consequences of doing wrong? Throughout the Republic, Socrates tries to prove that justice is valuable in itself, even if no one is watching. Without Glaucon's difficult questions, Plato's philosophy would never become so deep. Three. Adeimantus, the practical questioner. The next character is Adeimantus, another of Plato's brothers. While Glaucon raises philosophical challenges, Adeimantus focuses on practical concerns. He asks questions that ordinary people might ask. For example, parents often tell children, be honest, be kind, do good, but then children notice that dishonest people sometimes become rich and successful. Naturally, they ask, if bad people often succeed, why should we be good? Adeimantus raises exactly this kind of question. He asks Socrates to explain why justice should be practiced even when it does not bring immediate rewards. He also questions whether Plato's ideal state is too strict. Would people really be happy if every part of life were controlled for the good of society? His questions make Plato's arguments more balanced and realistic. Think of Adeimantus as the student in every classroom who asks, "Teacher, how will this actually work in real life?" These practical questions strengthen the discussion. 4. Thrasymachus, the sophist. Now we come to the most dramatic character, Thrasymachus. Unlike the others, Thrasymachus is aggressive and argumentative. He represents the sophists, professional teachers who believed success depended on persuasive speaking rather than discovering truth. Early in the Republic, Thrasymachus suddenly interrupts the discussion and makes a shocking claim. He says, justice is nothing but the advantage of the stronger. In simple words, he believes that powerful people make the laws. Whatever benefits the rulers is called justice. According to him, might makes right. Imagine a dictator who creates laws only to protect his own power. According to Thrasymachus, those laws become justice simply because the ruler is strong enough to enforce them. Socrates strongly disagrees. He argues that true justice cannot depend on power. If justice changes whenever rulers change, then justice is not real justice. Real justice must be based on truth, wisdom, and goodness. This debate becomes one of the central discussions in Plato's philosophy. Conclusion. These four characters are not random individuals. Each one represents a different way of thinking. Socrates represents the search for truth through questioning. Glaucon represents the sincere student who challenges ideas to understand them better. Adeimantus represents practical reasoning and everyday concerns. Thrasymachus represents the belief that power is more important than morality. By allowing these different voices to debate with one another, Plato teaches us an important lesson. Philosophy is not about memorizing answers. It is about asking meaningful questions, examining every argument carefully, and using reason to move from opinion to genuine knowledge. As we continue through this presentation, These characters will guide us through Plato's deepest ideas about justice, truth, education, politics, and literary criticism.